last few weeks, I've been put in a pretty difficult position where I've continually felt like I didn't have a choice on coming forward to discuss my personal experiences anonymously.
Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to a brand new YouTube video, and in today's video we're going to be covering a video the Saberspark accuser recently released. It's an hour long and it has a lot of stuff that I want to get into, so without further delay and without further ado, let's dive straight into this. Thankfully this video is timestamped with establishing what enthusiastic consent looks like, what my experience was and is, clearing up misunderstandings, claims I'd like to address directly, claims about baby tracking, claims about making me take a pregnancy test, panic attacks and health problems, last few points I want to address, and wrapping up. Of course it goes without saying, but this video will be a recap of this video and going over the most vital points that I want to address directly. Of course, if you want to see it in its entirety, the video is there and it is timestamped so you can jump across points that you are most interested in. But without further ado, let's actually take a look at the video itself now.
Recently, old text messages were shared in a recently uploaded video where Saberspark shares his side of the story. After reading those messages again after years have passed, I want to start by saying this before we dive any further. I recognize that Saberspark may not have fully understood at the time what clear and enthusiastic consent looked like in physical situations, and I'm sure the messages only gave him more of a reason to think these actions were okay. Especially now, I do not believe he acted with malicious intent, nor do I think he is an evil-hearted person. What happened made me uncomfortable, and I want to be honest about that.
From this we can gather that not only does she not believe that Saberspark had any evil intent or that he's a bad guy, but the messages they were reciprocating would have reinforced this idea that he did nothing wrong. So that's case closed. Thank you for watching today's Stop Me Your video. If you did enjoy, please sincerely leave a like and subscribe.
I have a right to own that experience and my own feelings, but I also want to acknowledge that inexperience and lack of awareness can play a role in how things unfolded, especially in situations like this. To be clear, his lack of knowledge does not mean I consented to either of the physical encounters mentioned. And like I said in the original testimony, for a long time I blamed myself for being in that position at all to begin with. But moving forward after this video, I hope you can walk away with this lesson. Let it be a reminder to everyone, no matter the circumstance, no matter how much you like someone or how mutual the attraction may be, always ask before initiating anything physical.
We previously went over in my last Saberspark video, the messages tell an entirely different story, so I'm incredibly fascinated to see what Emmy has to say about those said messages and how that paints the picture.
I want to address those using my text messages to claim I gave consent or lied about not giving it. Specifically, what those people have pointed out that I couldn't have been assaulted because I interacted with him afterwards, or how I asked for relationship advice, or still just wanted to maintain contact to begin with at all. You can still feel taken advantage of by somebody and still not know how to leave the friendship. You can also experience a situation like that and struggle with conflicting feelings about it and still want to like that person.
Let's not be ignorant and arrogant here, because whilst that certainly can be the case, if you show these messages to somebody and you said that this happened after you've been assaulted, people might raise a few eyebrows and question that, understandably so. Also, not just these messages isolated, it's the wider picture, the wider context of the situation as a whole.
Other things pointed out that people are claiming to be signs of consent are our flirty messages, or me telling him the sex was good a long time afterwards, in which he randomly brings up, despite the fact that words are words, and you'll see below, neither flirting nor lying to someone to not hurt their feelings about their sexual performance is consent.
But by these messages and the flirting interactions and saying things like good sex, it would build the picture that assault didn't take place, that it couldn't be further from the case, and that what happened was consensual. And I also don't understand why, if this was the case, that you felt like you'd been violated, why you would want to praise him for having good sex and not just hurt his feelings by being honest. Previously, the lies that have been exposed and this argument being incredibly flawed, this is just hard to believe. Me then goes on to quote unquote establish what enthusiastic consent looks like and go through what consent actually is.
Unfortunately, I didn't experience any discussion of what either of us wanted out of our encounter, or even if I felt comfortable in the situation. I wasn't even the one to willingly take my own clothes off. He claims we had discussions of this prior to the event, but provides no proof of this.
Is a fair criticism. Evidence is incredibly vital in situations like this, and it's exactly the same critique that people would dish out to you. In this situation, that can go exactly both ways.
Knowing that wearing certain clothes, flirting, or kissing is an invitation for anything further, there are random moments where he tries to imply other things we did, such as me leaning on his shoulder, that I feel helps build a stronger connection to the idea that I consented to the sexual interactions, something that does not equate to consent.
This has been quite a big topic of discussion, especially on the internet, over consent and implied consent, where two people are very clearly consenting to what they are doing, but just not saying it out loud, saying, yes, I consent to this, but their actions they are doing to each other are very clear that they are both happy with what is occurring.
Yes, I absolutely flirted with him at that time all those years ago. Consenting to flirting is not consenting to the actions that would follow later in person. Long after the occurrence already happened, I told Saber the sex was good at some point when asked because I didn't want to make him feel bad. Saber says it himself in his interview that the sex wasn't good.
Again, what people are going to read from you saying that the sex was good, regardless if that is the story that you were going with, that you said that to make him not feel bad, is that what took place was consensual, that you were okay with it, and that this situation isn't something that is non-consensual. If you say that it was good sex, there is heavy context behind that and heavy implications of that, and those implications, none of them come out by saying that this was non-consensual, and that paints a completely different picture, and that's something that I feel like Amy has to understand. Amy then goes over the bit of the Beckett and Saberspark interview and denies certain things that Saberspark is claiming.
I also want to address the question I've received often. If you were assaulted, why did you continue to have contact with him? This is a difficult and complex issue, one I've struggled with in other experiences of SA as well. It's incredibly hard to process the emotional weight of being put in a non-consensual situation, especially when the person involved was someone you had complicated feelings for. I liked him. That doesn't always go away immediately after occurrences like that for everyone. On top of that, I found myself blaming myself for what happened for a long time, thinking I was to blame because I had flirted with him and indicated I was interested in him.
Pushback that you could have to this would be that whilst it's understandable that trying to process a non-consensual interaction is hard, and as they've said, and if you choose to believe them, that they're a people pleaser and that's why they've said those things, the messages paint an entirely different picture from what Emmy is describing here. The messages are far more extreme and paint an entirely different context. In the midst of them trying to explain why they went about the situation as they did, why they didn't just cut them off immediately, pointing to this miracle website that explains victims' behavior, then they follow up by bringing up Black Griffin. If you don't know, this individual has their own set of allegations and is intrinsically linked to this situation.
Just not all of them. Then to my horror, I learned that on top of all of this years later, he was also defending a friend of his who has accusations of his own through being inappropriate with minors, and the two of them would joke about convention consent at public events.
I'm ready to give some consent if you know what I mean.
Oh. Need some practice, if you know what I mean?
All right.
Yeah. For the record, I don't need consent, if you know what I mean.
That's not getting canceled, but you know what I mean.
He even uses his initial response to the allegations to defend Black Griffin.
I think this is such a bizarre point in this response because it's very clear that Amy doesn't have an actual understanding of the said situation and is weaponizing it to bash Saberspark with.
He'll need to be talked about. I say that I pulled away from Saber along with getting the time wrong during an investigation, and this is being seen as proof enough of a discrepancy that renders my entire experience fake somehow. Meanwhile, Saber gets the timeline wrong in his interview where he talks about ghosting me for months despite having the text messages in front of him. This is something that was called out by the interviewer, but shows that he too has inconsistencies in his own timeline.
So if this was, I mean, you say you pulled away from her for the next few months, but I mean, because I've seen your DMs with her. Yep. So if you pulled away from her, I mean, it wouldn't be for months, Saber.
Not months, I would say.
This all happened 13 years ago. It's not going to be easy to remember every detail. The only reason I remember the physical event so vividly is because of telling close friends I trusted and therapists about the experience for years.
But again, I do think it's important to bring up inconsistencies within the story on both sides. That is what a fair shake looks like, bringing up the inconsistencies on both sides of the story and comparing them.
Again, I've continued to carry on the feelings of being taken advantage of for a long time. If we're going to question inconsistencies in stories, it's important to acknowledge that in Saber's original statement, the takeaway for many was that I wasn't a real person, but rather a fabrication of KP and Bonk.
So let's talk about the response video for a second. Because Saberspark more so kind of says that the whole thing was just a giant hit piece on him, which I think is probably the reason why people think you don't exist.
Ladies and gentlemen, I'm going to stop the entire video here just to take another shit on this awful interview, because the interviewer was speaking more than the accuser. They were speaking over them at times. They were deep breathing over them like Darth Vader. It was absolutely horrendous. Not only that, but they were actively injecting their biases and their opinions on the situation in the midst of the interview, which muddied the waters entirely for that particular interview. Anyway, rant over about the Darth Vader interviewer who interviewed them. Anyway, let's move on.
Implied is that this was just a manifestation of KP and Brony Fandol. I was shocked to see that. This implication contributed to Bonk being severely harassed online to the point where it impacted his mental health, which people cheered on, including people Saber himself platformed in his own response.
Of the disingenuous phrasing and behavior here when it comes to Brony fandom, because there is a lot more to the backlash they received, the criticism they received that ended up in their mental health getting bad, and weaponizing that in your video is genuinely insane without the context is incredibly disingenuous. Kind of muddied the waters on your own argument a little bit there just by being disingenuous, regardless of how good your argument actually is.
When these kinds of things are shared online, people often feel they need to pick apart testimonials without evidence because there's nothing else to go off of, which I think is a fair thing to conclude, but in many of these situations, these misconceptions bleed into how the accuser is treated. Really, it's hard for anyone to win in these situations because everyone feels the need to take a side or try to come to someone's defense. People want to be fair and not falsely accuse anyone while also wanting to maintain some form of support to the accuser as well, which is why I think sharing your experience to anyone who isn't your friends, family, a therapist, support group, or a professional who is trained in handling these situations will almost always end badly unless you have evidence. Otherwise, you will experience so much stress trying to defend your personal experiences. This is exactly why I initially wanted my involvement with Saber to remain anonymously.
I mean, yeah, that's how people are going to act, because if you allege something and you come up with your story without any evidence, people are going to be a lot more critical, and that's going to influence how people proceed with that situation. And as nice as it would be to remain anonymous, if you come out with a story like that with a serious accusation against a content creator, people are going to question that said story and the anonymity of that person.
Knowing that, I had to step forward in some way and tell someone, even if I didn't initially want it to be known to the public that these were my personal memories. Ultimately, I don't have much evidence. This was never expressed to mobilize people against Saber. In fact, people who cheered on his downfall left my stomach in knots. People were happy that I was put into the situation because it gave people the green light to go after him. It was intended to help people who, like I have, found themselves in a situation they're not equipped to navigate, and who hold regrets all these years later, and to also prove to myself that I can speak up about my experiences. I did try to obtain evidence, such as the footage in the elevator when he pushed me against the wall, something that he lied about in his interview.
I understand their motivation there about wanting to come out with their story, just to, tell people that you're not alone and trying to inspire other people to come up with their story. If you come out with a story like this publicly against anybody, let alone a influencer, people are going to want evidence for that said accusation, and I think that is fair enough.
I really didn't know him all that well, despite trying to maintain a sense of closeness with him. It's forced, and you can clearly see that in the messages. I wanted to be anonymous in the first place for a reason. Coming out and discussing this publicly, especially as a much smaller content creator, leaves me vulnerable, and I have little to gain from this discussion at large on a personal level, and the odds were never in my favor sharing these experiences. There was never an incentive to share these intimate details about my life with the internet at large.
An argument that a lot of people will have to this is by making an allegation publicly to a big public figure, you do have an incentive there to gain something. The pushback on that would be that initially they were an anonymous person, something that they've said that they wish they stayed as. But unfortunately, if you do publicize an allegation publicly, even as an anonymous individual, you can't actually promise that person's anonymous identity there. Because if you publish an allegation publicly, it's, well, public.
I also want to address remarks made by a few others who are suggesting I'm using my health and trauma as a shield against criticism. I want to clarify that I don't use my health challenges or past trauma as a shield against criticism. Instead, I only share my health or experiences so that people may better understand my challenges.
Well, I'm glad you clarified that, because I guess it's all done then. Case solved. Let's just wash our hands of that. People are going to perceive how you bring up your health challenges in different ways. People are going to assume that they are excuses. Some people are going to be more charitable. That's just how it works. This doesn't prove anything, and this doesn't help anything. So let's be real, you're not exactly going to sit there and say, if it was the case, oh yeah, by the way, I'm using my health as a giant excuse and shield. Nobody's going to say that. You're always going to say the opposite. One thing that Emmy also does do in this response is respond to the whole pregnancy thing that Saberspark brought up.
First, want to start by saying this claim is abysmal. What's crazy is that there is no proof of what he's claiming anywhere.
I suppose to finish the story of the pregnancy scare, how did that kind of work itself out?
Into the convention on a Sunday, I remember going over to her hotel, being like, we have to get this test. Like, I need to know the answer before I head home, so I can know what's going on. I got the pregnancy test, came back, and I'm like, please, can you take this? And she goes, okay, because it was time's up. And she said, okay, I'll do it. And she took it, and it was negative. And I remember afterwards, I was like almost dumbstruck with relief. At that point, I started forming this opinion in my head where I'm like, did she just baby scare me to keep me in her life? that was the emotion surging through my head, along with relief.
The public response to this is honestly understandable. This is a serious and heavily loaded claim. I can understand why people are upset. However, I would never willingly put myself in a situation where I'd become pregnant by someone I had only met 5 to 10 minutes earlier, and then be tied to that person for 18 or more years, regardless of whether I had a crush on him or not. This was a guy whom, throughout most of our friendship, I didn't even call him by his actual name. It wasn't until later, after both occurrences had already happened, that I actually called him Steven. I gave birth a year prior. I was not about to go on that adventure again, especially with a man who I didn't even call by his real name. I wasn't about to put myself in a medically vulnerable position when I was traumatized by my experiences just a year earlier with all things medically related. It was way too soon.
I wanted to play that in full, as that's Amy's response to a pretty serious claim that Saberspark made. They also respond pretty seriously to the pregnancy test stuff, about being forced to take a pregnancy test and all of that, and ultimately this was one of their overall response pieces.
When it comes to taking a pregnancy test, I don't have memory of taking it personally. I just remember that it had been resolved and eventually getting my period. That being said, this is not me outright denying that one was taken. However, he did not go to my hotel Sunday to make me take one like he claims, to try to imply I was purposely trying to keep him on edge.
So that is Amy's side of that. They deny their claims. They say that they personally don't remember taking a pregnancy test, but they're not outright denying that that happened.
I do also want to point out that while I have given Saber the benefit of the doubt here, I do find him lying about multiple details such as holding hands to his hotel room, the IUD, the friends with benefits inside joke, me initiating the second time and claiming the elevator part to be completely untrue, to be extremely sketchy. I do feel if he truly believed he was fully innocent in this, he wouldn't feel the need to lie about multiple details. I can't prove some of these lies to be untrue, unfortunately, but hopefully shining a light on at least a few of them helps see a clearer picture.
A lot of it is, in that regard, a he said, she said situation, and I wanted to include that part specifically to show you that that is what's within this video. They've brought up some lies that they claim Saberspark has told. We've shown a lot of them in this video, but wanted to play that for full context and for full transparency. But that is it, ladies and gentlemen, for today's video. Of course, like I said towards the beginning of the video, this is the recap of the most important points, their most important arguments, the things that I felt like needed a bit of pushback towards. And of course, not everything is included in this video, in this recap, because the video is an hour long. There are things that are not included. So if you do want to see this accuser's full side of their story, please feel free to go and watch that hour-long video. I actually implore you to go and do so. Ladies and gentlemen, what's your thoughts on all of this? Please feel free to comment down below. And whilst you're done there, you might as well subscribe and hit the notification bell so you don't miss any future Slot Meal videos. But I've been your host Samuel, we've been covering this topic, and I will catch you in the next YouTube video.